Steve Nash said that at this level, 90% of what you do as a coach is just remind the players of what they already know. Remind them of how we on this team are committed to play. Remind them of their assignments. What is the play that we're trying to run? What is our strategy of how we're going to attack this team offensively or defensively? Remind them of things they might forget. And really only 10% of it is about teaching them new skills. That I believe the ratio is more like 75% reminders. And then 25% is identifying where are those gaps, where are those new skills. And we need to build upon the foundation of things we may already know, but we haven't ever been challenged to articulate what is that type of leader that I want to be and what is that culture that I'm trying to create.
Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced. The best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
To remind ourselves of what is it we've already learned and be willing to dive into practicing, to mastering, to flexing the muscles of what we already know.
Thank you for being here again. Thank you for tuning in. If this is your first time, welcome to the podcast. If you've been a loyal, long-time listener, then welcome back. And so glad you're here. If you're new, I hope you check out the earlier seasons of the podcast. So much great stuff that is in there. As always, I want this to be a place, a space in your life, in your week, for you to be able to step back, to be able to think, a place that you're filled with some positive thoughts and to help add value to your journey wherever you might be along your journey. I'm more convinced of this than ever, especially in the world that we've been living lately, that authentic leadership, those people in the world that are showing up to the people around them with authenticity and able to connect and engage the minds and hearts of people, and those teams and organizations that are creating compelling cultures, those kind of settings are needed more than ever in the world, and that our places of work and those teams and organizations that are bringing out the best in people are really some of the most significant places in the world right now. And so I'm glad that you are here, and I appreciate you being a part of this journey and this discussion. So I'm wondering if right now, if you'd be willing to do me a quick favor, wherever you are right now, do me a quick favor, and that is, will you rate this podcast? I hope it's 5 stars if it's earned it, but rate the podcast. If you have a moment to just step back and to write a positive review of the podcast. Again, I hate asking people to do this, but the reality is that's the way the algorithms work. This is the way that these things spread throughout the world, is by other people telling people about it. So anybody that's willing to take a moment to share and rate and review the podcast and help amplify it to the people in your life that ought to be a part of this, I sincerely thank you and appreciate you doing that. Thank you. So thank you for being a part of today. So today we are going to talk about an important but often forgotten rule of development. Whether you are a burgeoning piano player, an artist, an entrepreneur, a soccer player, or just trying to continue to develop as a leader or within whatever role you play at work, or stimulate progress within the most significant relationships in your life, developing is part mastering new skill and part remembering what you've already learned. The developing, again, this is something that we know, but it's also often forgotten, that developing is about remembering and developing and mastering new skills, but it's also about remembering that which we've already been taught, that which we've already learned. And as we know, the higher you climb in your mastery
of whatever you are pursuing, the less it's about acquiring new skill, and the more it's about remembering. It's about remembering the foundation of what you've already learned and practicing and repetition, becoming a master of what you've already learned. The higher you climb, the less it's about new skill, and the more it's about mastering and remembering what you've already learned. And obviously, the furthest you are away from mastering that with which you are pursuing, the furthest away, like those that are just beginning something new, some new venture that you're just beginning. So the furthest you away, then you also realize the path of development. Then if you're far away from mastering something, then you're at a space where the more new skills you must learn. That a higher percentage of what you have to learn is about acquiring new skill and then layering on top of it practice and repetition and mastering of those new skills that you learn along the way. But often in leadership development or professional development, we tend to focus primarily on the acquiring of new skills, which of course is important, of identifying those gaps, those new skills, those things that we need to learn and develop. That is a part of all leadership development and all professional development, of course. But in our pursuit of new skills, we can often forget what we've already learned or not learn to flex those muscles enough, meaning the things that we've already learned, the things that we already have in our foundational knowledge base, we're on to the next new skill rather than mastering and remembering and practicing and flexing the muscles of what we already know. So, if we know this about development, or sometimes we forget, and so I'm on this podcast, we're reminding us about this reality of development, then we also have to add into the fact that the reality is that we as human beings have never been more distracted, cluttered, and busy in the history of the world than we are today. You've heard me talk about this in the past. You've heard me reference this, certainly in my book, Remember. You've heard me reference this, but also research that has been shown up to show us that we as human beings and we as leaders and modern workers in the world today, that we've never been more scattered and distracted and busy than we are in the history of the world than we are right now. So you've heard me cite the Harvard Business Review study in the past that showed that the modern worker today gets distracted and shifts their focus from one task to another anywhere between 300 to 500 times in an average day, which that study didn't even include smartphones. So put that number on steroids of the number of times we start doing something and then we get distracted and we jump over to another task. If you remember again the study, the Harvard Business Review, it said that it's pointing to about a 30% productivity rate because we're so distracted. We're so cluttered. We're so busy. And somehow we as leaders and teams and organizations, we've bought into this myth that busyness, this idea of always doing something and always having something to do, that busyness equates to effectiveness. And yet what the research is showing us is that's absolutely not true. That just jumping around from thing to thing and this idea of busyness and, quote unquote, we've bought into this myth that means we work hard, that what it's leading to is a 30% productivity rate. 30% of the time we're focused on the things that are really helping us be productive and effective at whatever the mission is that we're trying to accomplish. And so we've been confused by this idea of busyness and thinking it equates to effectiveness, but the reality is it absolutely does not. A friend of mine says this, I love this phrase, but he says, we have an effing problem. We have an effing problem right in the world, and that effing problem is that we forget. We forget. That's our effing problem, is we forget. And I love that language. Our effing problem is that we forget what we've already learned. We forget. We skip steps. We lose sight of the foundational steps that helped get us to wherever we are, and also those steps that will continue to help us get better and stimulate progress. that in our pursuit for the new skill or the new thing or that distraction that's right in front of us, that what we end up doing is actually forgetting the foundation, the knowledge base we already have, and that really what we need to do is practice to master, to remember, and to build and flex those muscles. And that's how we will achieve the mastery, rather than just the constant trying to acquire a new skill, that we need to actually take the time to master the skill. I was watching an NBA game the other night, a professional basketball game the other night. I had it on in the background as I was just sitting there, and I was relaxing at the end of the day. And of course, many of you know, I love basketball, so I have this on in the background, and it brings a sense of calm to me and a enjoyment of just watching people play. But here I am watching the best athletes on planet Earth. I mean, these are just the best athletes. The size, the speed, the athleticism, the hand-eye coordination, the changing speed and direction, and the skill with which they bring to these movements is, in my opinion, just the best athletes on the planet. And the reality is, in the NBA, in professional basketball, there are only 15 players on a roster. And there's 30 teams, so there's only 450 humans on the planet that make it to that level, that get to play in the highest level of basketball in the world, the NBA. Only 450 humans. And so many good basketball players. There are so many good basketball players in the world, way more than 450. There are so many good basketball players in the world, and yet only 450 humans get to make it to that small elite level. Only a small percentage have the athleticism and the skill to play at that level. And so here I am watching this game, and the announcer, who also happens to be a former coach, Jeff Van Gundy, at a timeout in the game, he shared a conversation that he had recently with a new head coach and also an NBA Hall of Famer as a player himself, Steve Nash, who's the new head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. But he was sharing a conversation that he had recently with Steve Nash, who's made this transition from Hall of Fame NBA player and now is in his first time as a head coach, really his first head coaching experience at any level. And yet he's at the NBA level. And so he was asking Steve Nash about that transition and about what is he learning about what is the experience of being a coach of these elite athletes in the world. And Steve Nash said, that at this level, 90% of what you do as a coach is just remind the players of what they already know. I have no doubt that there will be time in the near future, I'm not sure when, but where there will be power in congregating again, power in bringing your whole team together, your entire company and organization together in one space for that powerful keynote speech, that discussion that has to happen as a team, an entire organization about leadership and culture and mindset. But until then, we are in a virtual world. And so if I can add value to your team, your company, or organization through a virtual keynote speech, or just helping your team and organization have the conversation that's the currency for change that you need to be having internally, I hope you'll track us down and let us know how we can be helpful at jasonvbarger.com. Remind them of how we on this team are committed to play. Remind them of their assignments. How are we guarding this particular ball screen? What is the play that we're trying to run? What is our strategy of how we're going to attack this team offensively or defensively? That it's not teaching them the new thing. It's about reminding them of that alignment that they're trying to have together and reminding them of the baseline foundational knowledge they already have. Remind them of things they might forget in the midst of a fast-paced game because we have an effing problem. And so that 90% of coaching, he said, at that level is just reminding them of what they already know and what they've already done. And really only 10% of it is about teaching them new skills. is helping a player identify a new skill or a new attribute that they need to develop to kind of stimulate progress in their game, that 90% of it is bringing them back to the fundamentals of what they already know, but helping them practice and master it and bring their mind back to remembering this is what we're trying to accomplish. And so at the highest level of development of your craft, let's just say the NBA and those elite 450 players, again, not as basketball players, but let's just think about it as however you want to think about the elite of whatever it is that you think about in your career, in your industry, whatever that may be. If 90% at that level is about reminders and only about 10% is about new skills, then what does this mean as a reminder to our own development outside of that elite? Again, you may be in that top, 1% in your industry. You might be in the top 1% as a leader or as a company, or top 1% in the craft that you do in the world. And if you are, I am so fortunate and happy for you and glad. And so if that's the case, then typically you're probably fall into that place of 90%. You just need to be remembering, and 10% maybe is still looking and acquiring new skills. I mean, even LeBron James and Michael Jordan or Serena Williams or whoever the best violinist in the world is if you're the elite, you're probably still identifying those 10%. How can I continue to stretch and get better? And if you fall into that 1%, the elite, then that's awesome. But most people fall outside of that category that would be referred to as elite, which doesn't mean you're not fantastic at what you do, does not mean you might even be best in class, if you will. It doesn't mean that you aren't at the above average or however you categorize that. But if we know that the elite, that the ratio is 90% reminders and 10% mastering of new skills, then maybe outside of that elite, sphere, that I believe the ratio is more like 75% reminders, which means still when we come together to develop, part of our development process is we have to build upon the foundation that we already have, to remind ourselves of what is it we've already learned and be willing to dive into practicing, to mastering, to flexing the muscles of what we already know. And then 25% is identifying where are those gaps, where are those new skills that we need to develop, of how we can raise our level of performance individually or collectively. And of course, that those percentages could be more or less depending on where you are on your own journey of mastery, wherever you are. If you're obviously lower down and you're just beginning something, then obviously the reminder percentage would be lower and the acquiring new skills would be higher. And again, as we move to elite, that the suggestion is that the reminders become even more significant and the mastering of new skills becomes less. But the most effective leadership development programs I lead within a team or company, or culture-shaping initiative across an entire team or organization, what I've noticed is that so much is often, other approaches people take is all about acquiring of new skill. And the reality is that most of the time, the most effective leadership development programs and or most effective culture shaping initiatives is, yes, there is an element of what are new skills and new ways of thinking, acting and interacting and development that we need in order to enhance our performance. But the highest percentage, the most effective programs, the most effective initiatives, the most effective experiences that engage our minds and hearts are really connecting us back and helping us remember the foundational elements of leadership and culture shaping that we may already know, but because we have an effing problem, we need to be reminded of it, and we need to begin to master and flex those muscles and practice those things we already know, and then be able to develop maybe 25% of what are those new skills that we need to develop to raise our level as a leader or as the culture that we're trying to create. And so, it's the most effective forms are the ones that are being able to remind each other already of what effective, influential, exceptional leadership looks like in action and behavior. Oftentimes when I'm beginning a leadership development program or we're beginning a culture shaping initiative, is we need to step back and we need to redefine what does authentic leadership look like? What is that culture that we're trying to create? And we need to build upon the foundation of things we may already know, but we haven't ever been challenged to articulate what is that type of leader that I want to be and what is that culture that I'm trying to create, so that then we can build upon that 75% of the foundation that we already have and be able to make sure that we get really clear and practice what effective, influential, and exceptional leadership looks like in action and behavior. And it's 75% reminders of the things we've forgotten, and then 25% of developing of new skills, new thinking, acting, and interacting. Because we have an effing problem, the best facilitators are the ones that are able to get us looking in the same direction, get us honing in on what are those foundational things we need to remember and practice and grow, and then where are those gaps where we have an opportunity to develop and improve. So, as you think about your team, your organization, your business, your family, your community, what are the conversations that need to be had that are focused on reminders of remembering why are we doing what we are doing? What's the purpose, the mission behind why we do what we do? Where is it that we're actually trying to go? What's the vision for where we're trying to go and what we want to be different? How are we committed to getting there? What are the values of how we hope to show up as a leader, or the values of how we want to show up as a culture? And then lastly, then we can get to what is it that we're actually going to go do? What's the strategy, the actual actions and behaviors that we're going to put into place of how we're committing to traveling, what we're going to go do to raise our level of leadership, to raise the level of the culture we're trying to create? What are we going to go do to practice, to flex those muscles, enhance our own development? What reminders, of watching film and being, as we step back and we think about ourselves as our own individual leaders, or again across a team and organization, to be able to step back and identify, whether that's like a coach that's watching film, but stepping back to look at our own, your own performance as a leader, or whatever it is that you're pursuing, and be able to identify the small actions, the behaviors or mindsets that we chose in the moment, because and to realize where are those examples of times where we made one choice, but because in that moment we had an effing problem and we forgot the bigger picture. We forgot what we were trying to accomplish. And so it doesn't mean we're a horrible leader, doesn't mean we're a horrible culture, doesn't mean we're a horrible team, but we need to identify where are those moments where maybe we forgot, and then the opportunity we have to just step back and return and remember back to that foundational stuff that we already know. Why are we doing it? Where are we trying to go? How are we committed to getting there? And what is it we're going to do next? We may have just forgotten our particular assignment, or the responsibilities or the expectations for the role that we are currently in. Then you can identify and focus on the areas where new skill, new competencies, new development is needed to happen. So I talk about this as the 75-25 rule. The 75-25 rule that in developing ourselves as individuals, as leaders, or as cultures, is that 75% of the time it's about reminding ourselves of those basic foundational things that we need to master and practice together. And then 25% of it is about new skill, identifying those new ways that we will stimulate progress and move ourselves forward. If we have an effing problem as humans, then we may just need help with reminders. And part of the role that a good leader, a good coach, a good facilitator is to help remind us so that we don't just get distracted, busy, and have that effing problem where we're just running around scattered and inconsistent. And the culture for how we coach, the culture for how we teach, the culture for how we develop the people around us, and certainly within teams and organizations, the culture of how we do development. It matters. Leaders, teams, and organizations play an enormous role into the future. I believe this, that right now, the world we're in right now, our places of work, our places of employment are playing an enormous role in the future of our, not only just our businesses, but in our world. And I believe it's our leaders, our teams, our places of employment that are going to help lead us in this direction of helping us raise the bar on our own individual leadership, our own individual actions in the world, and also help us be co-creators and participants in creating the culture that we want to be a part of, whether that's at work, starting at work, but also what is that culture that we want to be an active participant in creating in the world, in our communities, in our teams, in our families, and in the world. And the best in the world, the best leaders, teams, and organizations, that's what they're doing, is they realize that the culture of how we coach, teach, and develop matters. So as always, I'll leave you with some questions for your own journey. What do you and your teammates need to be reminded of? What do you and your teammates need to be reminded of? What are the areas that you need to kind of re-practice what you've already learned? What are those areas that need more foundation? You already have the foundation, but where do you need to practice and master and flex those muscles some more? And then you can ask the question of what new skills, new habits need to be taught to build upon that foundation that you already have. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet are always stimulating progress by recalibrating their thermostat together.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using. And share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to your organization, or you have a question or comment about this podcast, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we all are ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.